Hello there everybody, this is Speckblocklime here with another video reaction for all of you today. Now the video we're going to do is from the channel Mr. Ballin. Before I get to the video though and say anything about it, I'm going to give you a heads up that these are reaction videos. Me reacting to these videos. This is not the original. If you want to see the thing without me talking over them or, any of my audio on top, please go watch it before in case anyone's there. Same thing with any other reaction channels. If you want to watch the originals, go watch the originals. But, this is what the reaction channel is for, watching other people, what they think about the topic. I think reaction videos have some corner value. But I do get it, there's a little bit of criticism about some reaction videos because, people they just watch and they don't really react too much. It's not too bad, it just depends on what it is. But, I think it's harder when it's shows and like original content, like videos of other things people created. But anyways, I'm just giving you a heads up. This is a reaction video, so if you want to watch the original, go watch the original. Now this one is called "A Secret Was Hiding in Plain Sight: The Lost Colony of Roanoke." This topic, I think I've seen some videos before about it. Maybe even read an article once. But I don't remember exactly how all the things that I remember exactly are. But I want to see how Mr. Ballin's going to put, their take in it. And see, what they think. And maybe they're going to bring up something new that I don't know. Or, combine information. Or maybe even incorrectly, like, change something that I thought was correct. And it's not anymore because maybe it was wrong information in another video or two. So here we go.
I don't know about you, but I am far more interested in mysteries that have occurred in the relatively recent past. I think it's easier to relate to the people involved because they probably lived their lives kind of similar.
Yeah, there's always interesting to like some things,
similar, right?
How they happen.
And also like the information, if you're looking at a case that happened 50 years ago or less, it's easier to fact check that information, and there's probably more information about that case.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at something that's happened, let's say hundreds and hundreds of years
well, obviously,
ago,
hundreds of years would be hard.
Certainly there are people involved, and being a human being, I can relate to them in that sense. But the way they lived is a lot different than we live now.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to kind of put myself in their perspective because my experience living on the earth is so much different. And of course,
time period,
information, even if it was diligently
and then what we know now compared to what they knew then,
it's taken hundreds of years to arrive in front of me now. And so the opportunity for information to change or to be passed down inaccurately or to just be a straight up embellishment is
that could happen too.
So the accuracy of information in older cases, it's a little bit up for grabs. So I tend to be interested in more recent mysteries. But there is one case, in fact, it is the oldest unsolved mystery in American history that I have been fascinated with.
Well, maybe when it comes to, how America was kind of making itself, I guess.
About it now in this video is not only have I found it fascinating, but there has been some recent discoveries, as recent as 2011, that totally changed the theories about what could have happened in this particular case. And the case I'm referencing is the lost colony of Roanoke. The too long didn't read version of this story is when England first tried to colonize America, they set up a colony on Roanoke Island, which is right off the coast of North Carolina. And when it wasn't going very well and the early colonists, they needed more supplies, they sent their leader back to England to get more supplies. But when he came back, the colony was gone. All 150.
I think I remember this part.
Without a trace.
They were just nowhere.
All that was left were two strange messages. One was on a tree, and one was on a fence post, right in where the colony used to be. And for centuries, historians and amateur sleuths alike have debated what those messages mean. But a recent discovery in 2011 completely.
And I think I remember hearing, and at least what I heard, that they some info about it meant they might have been someplace, but they never went to check that area, I think, or they couldn't. I think. But like I said, hopefully Mr. Ballin brings it back up, and then we can hear or understand what some of the info is about.
If you would, please gently assassinate the like button, and then turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of these cool stories.
I'm gonna try not to pause too much. That's what I do. I don't like
1500s,
having too many
England
pauses
wanted to
in my
colonize
videos if it's
America.
possible,
And in the
because
early
it makes it a little more
1580s,
frustrating for
an
some people
Englishman by the
because
name
they
of
want to
Sir
watch the whole
Walter
reaction.
Raleigh was
I
basically
know that people do
given
that though, and that's
permit
fine. It's just I don't want to
go
do it like
colonize
that.
America.
Possible.
Basically, it said, okay, it's 1580.
I either
and
talk
you
about
have
something a
until
little bit before it or then
1591
after.
to colonize somewhere in America. If you can't do it by then, you're going to lose your permit. He starts getting funding together. He starts, looking on a map to figure out where's a good spot to land. And by 1584, he's ready to launch his first reconnaissance mission to America. So in 1584, 2 ships make their way to North America, and they land somewhere in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. They land, and they actually quickly befriend the local Native Americans that are there. And in fact, they invite these English people to come to their village, which was on Roanoke Island, also in North Carolina, not too far from the Outer Banks.
That's what the island.
So these early English settlers are brought to this village, and they're able to coexist with the Native Americans really beautifully. They're sharing trade secrets, they're learning how to hunt, they're learning how to do all the things that you would need if you were going to live in this new land. And again, they're being embraced by the local population, which was huge. So after
that's such a big difference compared to some other events.
That group of early settlers is really excited about the possibilities of settling in America. So they make their way back to England, and they share their findings with Sir Walter Raleigh, and preparations are immediately began to launch an actual colonization.
Yeah, to make it more professional. This was just like checking, testing,
so 1 year
seeing
after
how
this
it would
initial
work.
reconnaissance mission, Sir Walter Raleigh is ready to launch this full-fledged effort to colonize America. And so he sends 7 ships with 600 men and supplies that were designed to last that group of people for a full year. And so everything's going beautifully.
Damn, that's how I was surprising. How many?
And when they reach the Outer Banks, their flagship, the biggest and best ship they had that was carrying the bulk of their supplies, their food, their fresh water, it ran aground, and a lot of their supplies fell into the ocean and were spoiled. And so this is a devastating blow, and they know immediately that, well, not everybody on this fleet can actually land here. So they sent 500 men back to England and only landed 100 of the original 600 in Roanoke.
Oh, damn.
Now, as soon as this second round of settlers, these 100 men, landed in Roanoke, they went and spoke with the local Native Americans. There was already good relationships built from that first reconnaissance mission, and these settlers were given permission by the local natives to build their colony in Roanoke. So they begin constructing their colony.
All right.
And everything is going off without a hitch. In fact, the Native Americans were incredibly generous. They worked closely with the settlers and did their best to support them however they could. Now,
that's not bad.
The settlers, they still needed more supplies. They didn't have this robust supply that they planned on having because much of it was destroyed in that shipwreck as they initially made their way in. So they had been promised by the 500 returning crew members that they were going to send supplies by the following winter.
Okay.
So they're anticipating this shipment of new supplies, and as they get closer to the winter time, the 100 settlers that are there, they're running incredibly low on supplies to the point where they actually basically run out. And so they had to rely on the local Native Americans' generosity just to stay alive. When the shipment that was supposed to be there in the winter did not show up, and in fact had actually been canceled, they didn't know this. It had been canceled by Queen Elizabeth, who basically said that wasn't important. We're going to focus on things that are happening in England.
Oh,
that
no.
doesn't show up. The tensions between...
That's terrible because that's for your people. You could at least tell them that if it's not coming to either come back or you're going to have to survive by yourself. You can't just do that. You could have just sent somebody saying, like, we bought miniature amount of supplies, that's it, we're going to give you this, and then if you want to come back, you can come back now. If not...
The local natives, instead of being violent, decided that they would just abandon Roanoke and go to the mainland and would just kind of give Roanoke Island to the settlers, and that would kind of solve all the problems. But the English settlers took their retreat as a sign that they were actually going to the mainland of North Carolina, these Native Americans, and were going to be forming alliances with other tribes, and then they were going to come back out and wipe out the 100 settlers.
Oh.
We don't know if that's true because what happens next is the English settlers, in kind of a fit of paranoia, they preemptively cross the water and they make it to the mainland and they attack the Native Americans that had previously been helping them and keeping them alive, and they actually wiped them out. These English settlers come back to Roanoke Island, and now the paranoia is even higher because now they don't have supplies, they don't know how to live there, they've just basically started a war, and it just so happens that an English-bound fleet was passing by the area on their way back to England, and when they stopped at the colony, the settlers were basically in a panic. I mean, at this point, they've just
so other people were passing by. They went on their own journey or something else.
Freaking out about what's going to happen to them, and they were in such a rush to abandon the colony and evacuate that only 97 of them got on the ships and left. They literally left 3 people there. They said, well, they're not here for the evacuation, so we're out of here.
What?
So sure enough, that fleet took the 97 settlers and they left, leaving those 3 settlers to fend for themselves. As irony would have it, just days after this evacuation, Sir Walter Raleigh, he had sent additional ships with resupplies and reinforcements to Roanoke, and they literally arrived like a couple days after this mass evacuation. But when they arrived, the colony was abandoned, and they didn't find those 3 men that were left there. So Sir Walter Raleigh's reinforcements just left. And then a couple weeks later, another English-bound fleet passed by Roanoke and stopped to check in on the colony, and they found it abandoned. And because they had so many people on this fleet that was passing by, they decided to leave 15 crew members at the colony because they felt like this is an English colony. It's not in total disrepair.
I mean, I get it, but
and perhaps this is going to be useful to the crown, or we can use it in some way. So they leave.
But like, I know, but that's 15 people only.
Guard the outpost.
And what are they gonna do? They don't think those guys know how to survive either.
So it would be.
Seems like a terrible idea.
Anybody went back to Roanoke, so those 15 crew members were kind of hung out to dry a little bit. But a man by the name of John White, who had been a part of that initial failed colony in Roanoke, who had evacuated
the 101st people, I guess.
He was still eager to colonize America, and so he actually convinced Sir Walter Raleigh to launch a new expedition back to America to try to recolonize, not in Roanoke, but slightly north in the Chesapeake Bay, which was just viewed as a more fertile and just more advantageous position.
All right.
And then in 1587, they send out 3 ships back to America to try this colonization effort all over again. It is important to note that unlike the first effort, which was much more kind of militaristic, it was literally 600 men sent to America. This time it was going to be a more kind of civilian approach, where it was men, women, and children being sent over to America to colonize. So with John White as the captain of these 3 ships, they're making their way towards America, and again, their plan was to go north to the Chesapeake Bay area.
Yeah, a different area to see if it's better than the island.
Pass by Roanoke on purpose because they knew about those 15 crew members that had been left there, almost a year prior.
Oh, really?
So they intended to stop at Roanoke and basically have a meeting with those crew members, give them supplies if they needed it, and then make their way up to the Chesapeake Bay. However, something strange happens where the chief navigator, a man by the name of Simon Fernandez, who had navigated during the initial reconnaissance mission, the very first trip to America.
Oh, before the colonization, like the early, where it was actually working and it was fine.
When they brought the 600 men, now navigating for this 3rd trip with John White. He had the charisma of a real leader and was frankly just very well respected. He's an incredible sailor. And even though John White was technically the captain, really it was Fernandez that really had the respect of all of the people on this trip to America. And so for some reason, Fernandez decided that he just didn't want them to go up to Chesapeake Bay. And instead, when they got to Roanoke to have this meeting with the 15 crew members,
those guys,
he just basically told everybody to get off. Like, we're not going to go north. Everybody that's here to colonize, go ahead and get off because we're out of here. And John White didn't put up a fight. I think he recognized that the pull this guy had was going to be too much. And the crew and everybody who was there just kind of accepted it. And so even though it was a total deviation, they just
Big change,
began
yeah.
to colonize Roanoke, even though, again, that was never their plan. So as they're literally descending upon Roanoke, they're getting ready to meet with these 15 crew members who they're really hoping are still alive. But there's no sign of them. There's no sign of the crew that were left behind.
Damn.
And all they find is like a little pile of bones. And John White speculated that, perhaps this is a sign that the crew members were, attacked by, the Native Americans that were seeking revenge because they had been wiped out from that initial group that had been here, the initial English settlers. John White's suspicions would actually be proven true when just a few days after the 100-plus group of colonists that kind of began setting up camp in Roanoke, a man by the name of George Howe was away from the colony a little bit, and a group of Native Americans surrounded him and shot him with 16 arrows.
Ooh.
So it was kind of like a message to the settlers that, like, you're not welcome here. Your predecessors that wiped out an entire tribe, we haven't
different group. Like,
so you're not allowed to be here.
We're not gonna take our chances that you're gonna do that to us too.
His new
probably.
Colony. Feeling like the colony was kind of doomed from the start, the colonists actually told John White, hey, if this is the way it's starting, we need more people here, we need more supplies, like this is not a good start.
Yeah, it's not good enough.
Success here. You need to go back to England and get more supplies and bring them back here, because without that, we're doomed. And it just so happened that Fernandez, the guy that had kind of ditched them, he hadn't left the Outer Banks yet. He had anchored at the Outer Banks, and he was basically still available to take people back.
All right.
And so John White initially was against the idea because he didn't want to be viewed as someone that was kind of abandoning the colony when he got back to England. And John White's daughter, who was pregnant, was there.
Oh yeah, I think I remember this part.
Colonist. She was there in Roanoke, and he didn't want to abandon her. But ultimately, he says, "Okay, I'll go," and he goes.
Yeah, this part I remember a little bit.
Fernandez's ship, and they go back to England.
He needs to leave for a bit.
Unfortunately, when he got back to England, England was in the middle of a war with Spain, and so the Queen had ordered any English ship was basically not allowed to leave England because they needed to be able to defend themselves against the Spanish Armada. And so he wasn't able to leave England to go back to Roanoke, whether he had supplies or not, for 3 years.
Ooh.
And so 3 years go by, and he finally, with the help of Sir Walter Raleigh, is able to be put on a convoy of ships that is going
to go check
America with the necessary
the group that's still there.
Heads off. So it's 1590, 3 years since John White has left Roanoke, left his daughter.
Yeah, his daughter too.
To go back for supplies. Now he's back, and he's got the supplies, and they get to the Outer Banks, and they get in their small boats to make their little journey up around to the north side of Roanoke, so they can actually get on the island and go check out what's happening.
Yeah, to see what's
Roanoke. And when they land on the north side of Roanoke, they start yelling to try to get anybody's attention. There's no answer. As they walk up into the woods, they notice that there are some fresh footprints right on the beach and then in the woods itself. But again, no one's coming to greet them.
That doesn't seem like good news.
It's a bit of a bad omen, because if there are fresh tracks, either it's an English settler, in which case they would be eager to come see them, they'd be running out to meet them, or it's a Native American, which could mean they're, they don't trust the English settlers, right? They don't want to show.
But it makes sense, after all that's happening. I mean, if it happened,
they start moving in to where the Roanoke colony was, and they see 3 letters on a tree. It just says CRO on a tree as they're making their way into the colony. And again, they're yelling the whole time, trying to get anybody's attention, and no one's calling out. There's no sign of life anywhere. So they see CRO on the tree. And then they keep moving closer, and now they break out the colony. And the colony, when they left,
I'm trying to check right now.
Heavily fortified. Now it was very heavily
fortified. Okay. So at some point
pikes,
they put up all this stuff.
Wooden pikes lining the outside of this basically looked like a fort. And on one of the wooden posts that was kind of fortifying the outside of Roanoke, was the word Croatoan. There is
that's one of the things I think I remember from one of the videos.
Inside of this heavily fortified colony, this kind of fort, if you will, it looked like no one had been there in years. The grass was overgrown. basically anything of value had been looted effectively. There was the only things that were left were
Yeah, I mean,
really
that was
heavy
weird.
objects that would have been difficult to move. But there was also no sign of a struggle. There was not like human remains anywhere.
That's also
There
weird
wasn't
because
a clear sign of
they just
struggle. And
disappeared, but more
obviously,
like it was
it's a
on purpose.
well-fortified area, which leads you to believe that they were at least anticipating some sort of attack. But there was no sign of a struggle. They're just gone. John White, he would write about this experience when he arrived and just discovered the colony.
All the weirdness, like what is happening?
Gone, right? He wasn't actually
like when the 30 people disappear, okay, that's understandable. 15 too. I mean, they're small, but this many people disappearing is just incredible.
He left to go back to England to get the supplies, he had spoken with the people that would be staying there and said, look, if you need to abandon Roanoke for any reason, we need to have a system worked out to where if I come back and you're gone, I need to know what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And so you need to leave me a clue. You need to write a clue somewhere of where your destination is. If you're going by choice, just write the destination. If you're being forced, write the destination with a cross. And that will, to me, signify that you've left in distress. And so when he sees Croatoan and Crow on the tree, to him that just means, oh, well, they must have relocated to the island of Croatoan, which was 50 miles to the south. He would detail in his notes that before he left Roanoke in 1587 to go get those supplies, he said that the settlers had been talking about leaving Roanoke, abandoning Roanoke, and moving 50 miles north to the mainland, not 50 miles south to an island. The concern was the island was isolated and not a good place to have a colony.
Yeah,
so
it's not easy to start something there if you don't have the right way to do it.
Notes, oh, well, they were thinking about leaving to go 50 miles to the mainland, so that might be why they're at Croatoan Island. But that doesn't really make any sense because you're just kind of abandoning one problem set for another. Like, you want to leave an island because an island has unique problems. Why would you go to another island? You would go to the mainland.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense because another island might be the same difficulty as the island already on.
Croatoan Island. And so he quickly takes his men and he goes back to the ship and they begin to turn and set their course to go south the 50 miles to the Croatoan Island. But as fate would have it, the anchor line snapped as they're trying to make their way south to the Croatoan Island, and the weather was getting progressively worse and worse, and they start drifting north and north until finally the captain of the crew just said, look, we cannot go to the Croatoan Island. It's not going to be possible. And so they had to return to England. John White never would return to America, so he actually ended up dying with absolutely no idea what happened.
That is terrible. Never finding out what happened.
No one really knew what happened to the colony. It was just this huge cliffhanger. The assumption is they've gone to the Croatoan Island, but no one could prove that they really had.
Oh,
literally,
yeah.
For
the words.
centuries, people just speculated as to what could have happened to this colony. I mean, there's the assumption that perhaps they did just go to Croatoan.
Yeah, and then like I said, they never checked. I think from one other part they say they never checked.
They just became a part of the culture there. There was other theories that they were, wiped out at some point by angry Native Americans.
But I feel like that would have had at least some proof. Even if they escaped the island, wouldn't there be some of them dead on the island, like showing instances that they were killed by a fight? Just saying.
And he turned it into,
even if they still escaped, there would be some dead people there that were killed in the war.
Eleanor Dare, who was the daughter of John White. The pregnant daughter that he had abandoned and didn't get to see again. And she detailed what had happened. And half of the colony got wiped out by Native Americans that were angry at them. And then another percentage were taken captive. And then there's a couple survivors that are barely able to survive that don't really expect to live very long. At the time this stone was found, I mean, everybody knew that the last we had heard from the Roanoke colony was that they more than likely had made their way to the Croatoan Island, because that was the word written on the post, the CRO on the tree. I mean, that's what made the most sense. And so
with the logic of what information you have.
The daughter of John White, 50 miles to the north of Roanoke. Wouldn't it make more sense to have been found on either Roanoke itself or at Croatoan? Like, it didn't really add up. And so a lot of people speculated that stone had to have just been a fake, a hoax. But in 2011, a major discovery is
Alright, let's
made
hear
in
if
the
this is
Roanoke
anything new.
case that actually lends a lot of credibility to the stone that Eleanor Dare had apparently written on. John White was a painter by trade, and he had created all these maps of the colony, of Virginia, of North Carolina, of everywhere he went. He
Alright.
basically painted a
Mapper,
map. It was customary
I forget what their
at the
really
time when you were
professional name
making
is.
a map. If you had small mistakes on your map, you would actually cut a new piece of canvas, and you would put the corrections on that piece, and then you would slap it over wherever your mistakes were made.
Makes sense because
and
you
so
need
it wasn't
to,
uncommon if you were
like,
looking at a
so
map
much
to
work
see
you do
little
and you have to
patches
redo it
kind of all over
again,
the map.
and that's just a waste of
So
resources and
for
time.
literally
So I get
centuries, there
slapping
were
it on
these
top.
maps that John White had created that had a number of these little patches on the map. And in 2011, somebody who was researching said, well, why don't we look under the patches and just confirm that they really were just that, little mistakes that were covered up and corrected with a patch. And it turned out that on one of the maps, there was a patch over a section of land 50 miles to the north of Roanoke, around the area where that stone had been found. And underneath the patch was a star. And the star was set to resemble a fort. So basically there is an English fort built, basically where that stone had been found. But it had been covered over with a patch as if the fort was a mistake, right? Like, oh, whoops, shouldn't have been a fort there.
Yeah, I think I remember this part. It's either the
But
fort
upon closer
existed and they're
inspection,
hiding
the
it,
patch
or
that had been
an
put
accident
over
and they're trying to
that
remember
X on
something
the
that didn't
map
exist.
signified a fort right where that stone had been found. Well, on the patch, there was literally hidden ink where someone had drawn a similar X to denote a fort, and they'd put that over the obvious fort symbol that they were covering up. One could maybe make the case that they wanted to signify to someone that was maybe looking for,
Or maybe like a hit. I guess they're
they
supposed
wanted
to say a
signify
hidden
that
message
was
or
where the
something.
fort was, but they didn't want someone who intercepted the map, for example, the Spanish, because they'd just been at war with the Spanish,
Or just
they did
anyone
not
that's an
want,
enemy, I guess. That's what they're trying
where
to
a
say.
location of a fort was. Researchers began calling that site where there was that patch Site X. Now, Site X is 50 miles to the north of Roanoke. And if you recall from what John White had put in his description, when he was describing finding the writing on the tree and the posts.
They're talking about all the things that they experienced there and were able to
he
find.
He had referenced that the colony was planning to move 50 miles north to the mainland because that was a more suitable place to live. But of course, with the
some
writing
information
on the trees,
about that.
everyone thought, oh, well, they ended up going to Croatoan. Well, now is Site X. That is a location that lines up with what they had originally said they were going to do. And you have that stone written by Eleanor Dare at the same location. And so archaeologists descended upon the area that was Site X, and while they haven't confirmed that there's a fort, or they haven't found a fort in the area, they have found metal and pottery that is potentially indicative of an English settlement. And in fact, right now, they're still doing all sorts of archaeological digs and research to try to determine if that is where the Roanoke colony went. But even if that is the answer to the mystery, that in fact, it was just this hidden map and this stone that said, yep, they went 50 miles north, it doesn't really answer the question, which is what everybody thinks of when they think of the Roanoke colony, of why was Croatoan written on the fence post? Why was Crow written on the
tree? I mean, that's more specific than saying Roanoke.
And how is it that with all these eyes and all this interest in this case, dating back to literally the 1500s, how has no one ever found even one of the remains of the 115 colonists that apparently just vanished into thin air? So it's a fascinating case.
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
Which makes it even more fascinating.
I'm sorry I didn't talk super much. I did try to make comments on something. It's just the story's interesting.
To leave it in the comments so we can discuss it. So that's going to do it. If you want to be in touch with me, you can hit me up on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallin416. Also, I post quite a bit on TikTok. My handle is Mr. Ballin there. And that's going to do it, guys. Until next time, I'll talk to you guys.
That was an interesting video. Like I said before, I have heard some of this information. I think the way he connected a little bit with a little more information, they added more stuff up before they disappeared. I like that. I think on some of the other stories they did add little, but they focused more on the disappearance and then after a little bit, but mostly during the disappearance. This one I like that they added a little more info in the beginning before that even happened, to give you at least a little more an idea of how the story went or what happened. or maybe happened. Um, yeah, there's not really much I can add. It was just interesting. This is just a good story. So, if you want to see more, check out Mr. Ballin. Check out this video, many others. Go to the channel there and see what else they got. And hopefully, if you can, go keep back here and give us a review. We really could use it. This is Speckblocklime. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification button to get notified about future videos. Hopefully, you guys take care of yourselves. See you soon. We'll try to put a link down below to everything we're working on and to the video and to any social media. Take care. See you next time.